If you step back to the early days of cryptocurrency, before the flood of altcoins, NFT mania, and decentralized finance, the world of blockchain was almost entirely defined by one giant: Bitcoin. It was revolutionary, bold, and powerful. It challenged the idea of money, questioned the monopoly of banks, and gave people a new way to store value without permission from any authority. Yet, even with its brilliance, Bitcoin was intentionally simple. It was digital gold, nothing more, nothing less. A place to preserve value, not necessarily a platform to build upon. Then, like a spark in a room filled with dry wood, came a young programmer named Vitalik Buterin. He wasn't satisfied with the limitations of Bitcoin. He admired it, respected it, but dreamed of something bigger. He imagined a blockchain that was not just a ledger for transferring digital currency, but a foundation where applications could be built, executed, and automated without any middleman. A platform where contracts could run themselves, code could enforce agreements, and the entire logic of ownership, finance, and trust could evolve into something programmable. This idea became Ethereum. Ethereum wasn't born just to compete with Bitcoin. It was born to expand the possibilities of blockchain. Where Bitcoin answered the question, can we have decentralized money? Ethereum asked a bolder one. What if money and logic could live together in the same decentralized system? Instead of being a digital vault like Bitcoin, Ethereum was envisioned as an engine, a living machine where countless apps could run, interact, and reshape the digital landscape. It wasn't merely a coin, it was an ecosystem. To understand why Ethereum later earned the nickname electronic oil, you first need to feel the ambition behind it. Ethereum is not just another cryptocurrency. It is a global computer, a shared infrastructure maintained by thousands of nodes worldwide, where anyone can deploy code and trust it will run exactly as written. No company owns it. No government controls it. The rules are executed by math, cryptography, and consensus among its participants. In a way, Ethereum is like the internet of digital value: open, permissionless, borderless, unstoppable. But why was such a technology necessary? Before Ethereum, blockchain was like a calculator, powerful but limited to a single purpose. It could track balances, validate transactions, and secure digital money, yet it couldn't express more complex relationships. If someone wanted to create an escrow service, an insurance program, a decentralized auction platform, or a digital game where assets have real value, they needed to build everything from scratch. That meant creating a new blockchain, a new network, and convincing miners or validators to support it. Innovation was slow, fragmented, and costly. Vitalik asked, what if one blockchain could support all of this? What if we had a common platform where anyone could program their ideas, the same way developers write apps for smartphones? Imagine needing a new phone every time you want to install a new app. That was blockchain before Ethereum. Ethereum turned blockchain into an operating system. It was no longer just a ledger. It became a programmable world. And with programmability came the concept of the smart contract. The phrase sounds technical, but the idea is beautifully simple. A smart contract is a piece of code that executes automatically when conditions are met. No lawyers, no escrow agents, no banks. You and I could agree on something in pure code. If you send me money, the system instantly transfers ownership of a digital asset. If a loan is not repaid on time, collateral is released. If you win a game, rewards are distributed automatically. Trust is moved from humans to mathematics, from courtrooms to cryptography. This is the foundation of everything Ethereum represents today. When Ethereum launched in 2015, many still saw it as an interesting experiment. Yet within a few years, developers flocked to it, investors poured capital into it, and a wave of innovation took shape. DeFi platforms allowed people to trade, lend, and borrow without banks. NFT marketplaces gave digital art ownership real value. DAOs emerged, organizations governed by code instead of CEOs. Startups launched tokens, games created entire economies, and Layer 2 solutions scaled the network beyond its original limits. At the heart of all this activity lies a single resource: Ether, ETH. While Bitcoin's token is mostly a store of value, Ethereum's ETH is the lifeblood of the system. It pays for computation, powers smart contracts, and enables transactions. Nothing on Ethereum runs without ETH, and every execution consumes a portion of it. This is where the metaphor of energy, fuel, and eventually electronic oil begins to form. But we are moving ahead too fast. That discussion belongs to the next chapters. For now, it's enough to recognize how different Ethereum is from what came before it. It is not simply a digital currency. It is infrastructure, a platform for builders, a marketplace of ideas, a decentralized computer whose power grows with every new user, every deployed contract, every line of code. Bitcoin might be gold, a treasure, a symbol of wealth, a timeless storage of value. But Ethereum is a machine, and machines don't run on gold. They run on fuel. When Ethereum was introduced, the world didn't just gain another coin, it gained a new digital economy. And as we continue, the question naturally emerges. Why do people compare ETH not to gold, but to oil? Why is Ethereum fuel rather than treasure? Why do many call it the engine of the new Internet of Value? To find the answer, we will step into the second part of this journey, where we place Ethereum beside Bitcoin, not as rivals, but as two different forces that shape the crypto universe with two different destinies. When people first enter the world of cryptocurrency, it's easy to lump everything together under one label: coins, tokens, digital money. At a glance, Bitcoin and Ethereum can seem like siblings in the same family, both decentralized, both running on blockchain technology, both traded on exchanges and held as investments. But beneath the surface, they are as different as gold is to gasoline. One is meant to be stored, protected, admired for its permanence. The other is meant to be used, converted into power, consumed as it fuels an economy. Bitcoin came into existence as a reaction to the failures of traditional finance. It answered a single critical question born out of crisis. Can money exist without a central authority? Bitcoin's design is stark, elegant, almost minimalist. Its total supply is fixed. Transactions are simple transfers of value. The network moves slowly, deliberately, prioritizing security over flexibility. Satoshi Nakamoto envisioned a digital form of sound money, uncorrupted by inflation, unthreatened by censorship, untouched by political influence. Like gold, Bitcoin does not bend. It simply exists as a store of value, a hedge against instability, a fortress of digital wealth. Ethereum, however, was not built to replace money. It was built to expand what money can do. Think of Bitcoin as a vault, secure, resistant, unchanging. Ethereum is more like a vast workshop. In Bitcoin, you can store your assets and transfer them to someone else. In Ethereum, you can build tools, businesses, games, communities, financial systems, all powered by smart contracts. Where Bitcoin is static, Ethereum is dynamic. While Bitcoin focuses on being perfect money, Ethereum focuses on being a perfect environment for innovation. It's no wonder that people began to separate the two with metaphors. Bitcoin became digital gold. Ethereum became electronic oil. Two pillars of the same digital revolution, but each serving a completely different purpose. To understand why Bitcoin earned the gold comparison, imagine how society views gold. Timeless, scarce, universally recognized as valuable. Gold doesn't power machines or factories, it just sits, guarded in vaults as a guarantee of stability. Bitcoin behaves the same way. Its capped supply of 21 million coins mirrors the finite quantity of gold in the earth. It is slow to produce, difficult to mine, expensive to acquire, and impossible to forge. Investors hold Bitcoin the way ancient kings held gold bars, as a defense against inflation and uncertainty. But oil? Oil is not admired for being shiny or rare. Oil is valuable because it transforms into energy. It powers cars, heats homes, runs machines, fuels entire economies. Without oil, industry halts. That is how Ethereum functions within the digital economy. ETH is consumed when contracts are executed. It powers decentralized exchanges, liquidity pools, NFT marketplaces, tokenized assets, identity systems, gaming worlds, and more. Ethereum is an active economic engine, not a passive store of value. Consider a simple example. If you transfer Bitcoin to someone, you are moving value from A to B. The network verifies, confirms, and records the movement. The coin remains intact, unchanged. But if you interact with Ethereum, you aren't just moving value. You might be triggering a smart contract, swapping tokens, borrowing funds, validating ownership, minting NFTs, staking assets, or using decentralized applications. Each action is computation, and computation requires energy. On Ethereum, that energy is paid for in ETH through a mechanism known as gas. This is where the metaphor deepens. Just like oil is consumed every time a machine runs, ETH is consumed every time the Ethereum network executes code. It is not only a currency, it is fuel. The more active the network becomes, the more ETH is used to keep everything running. Imagine millions of apps processing millions of transactions per day. Lending, trading, gaming, insuring, voting, minting, bridging. Each interaction burns computational power, and that power is priced in ETH. You start to see why calling Ethereum electronic oil makes sense. It doesn't stop there. Bitcoin aims to be immutable. Its rules rarely change. Ethereum, in contrast, evolves. It upgrades, adapts, and transforms based on community consensus. Over the years, Ethereum has shifted from proof of work to proof of stake, improved scalability, reduced energy consumption, introduced mechanisms to burn ETH with every transaction, and opened the door for future optimizations. It is a living organism, growing, learning, refining itself. If Bitcoin is digital gold locked under the foundations of the blockchain world, Ethereum is the refinery that processes energy for the digital economy above it. One shines as a symbol, the other works like machinery. Some people misunderstand this comparison and believe it implies Ethereum is inferior because oil is consumed while gold is stored. But the truth is more nuanced. Gold symbolizes wealth, oil symbolizes utility. Both are incredibly valuable, but for different reasons. If you want to hedge against inflation, you buy gold. If you want to run an industrial empire, you need oil. And in the blockchain space, Ethereum is that empire's fuel. As we move deeper into the digital age, where ownership becomes tokenized, contracts become code, and transactions need no banks, it becomes harder to imagine a world without Ethereum. Not because ETH is money, but because Ethereum is infrastructure. If someone were to ask what drives Web3 forward, not philosophically like Bitcoin, but functionally and economically, the answer almost always leads back to Ethereum. Yet there is still more to uncover. We have drawn the comparison between Bitcoin and Ethereum. We now understand gold and oil. But the question remains, technically, operationally, how does Ethereum actually work in a way that requires fuel? What role does ETH play inside this global machine? And why does every smart contract, every transaction, every tiny interaction require a fee that behaves like fuel burning inside an engine? To answer that, we must open the hood of Ethereum and examine its inner mechanics. That's where the journey heads next. To truly appreciate why Ether is often described as electronic oil, we must step inside the machine and watch it operate. Imagine Ethereum as a vast global computer, one without a single server, without a CEO, without a central headquarters. Instead, it is maintained by thousands of machines scattered across the globe, each running software that keeps the network synchronized, honest, and secure. These machines are called nodes, and together they form a distributed system where every piece of information is stored collectively rather than in one place. No single node holds absolute power, yet all of them share responsibility. This design is what makes Ethereum so resilient. If one computer fails, nothing stops. If a government tries to shut it down, the rest keep running. The network behaves more like a living organism than a traditional database, self-maintaining, ever-connected, adapting and continuing as long as even a small fraction of its nodes remains alive. But a network that large doesn't operate on trust alone. It runs on consensus, an agreement among participants about the state of data. Consensus ensures that when someone sends a transaction, deploys a smart contract, or interacts with an application, every node will validate that action and record it the same way. You can think of it like a global jury verifying every event before it becomes part of history. Once they agree, the event is permanent, immutable, locked into the blockchain forever. Now imagine millions of people interacting with this network every day. They are trading assets, opening loans, purchasing digital art, gaming, voting, bridging tokens between chains. All of these actions are computations. And just like any computer, computation requires energy, not physical electricity this time, but digital fuel. This is where Ether steps in. Ether isn't just a currency. Inside Ethereum, ETH is the resource used to pay for computation. Every action has a cost. Every instruction executed by the network consumes energy, measured in something called gas. Gas is like the meter in a car that measures how much fuel is needed to travel a certain distance. If your smart contract is simple, you pay a small amount of gas. If it is complex, like executing multiple steps, checking conditions, transferring assets, then it needs more. The gas itself is priced in ETH, meaning that to make the network work, you must spend Ether. Without ETH, Ethereum is silent. No transactions move, no contracts run, no applications function. ETH is the juice that keeps the engine turning. Consider this example. Imagine you are using a decentralized exchange to swap tokens. In a traditional financial system, this operation would require a bank, intermediaries, layers of approval, fees, waiting time. In Ethereum, a smart contract replaces all of that. But to execute that contract, the network must perform thousands of validations and operations. Nodes check that you have enough funds, ensure the contract is valid, update balances, and write everything to the blockchain. Each small step costs gas, and gas is paid in ETH. That ETH is consumed in the process, just like oil is burned to create energy. This consumption is key to understanding why ETH behaves like fuel rather than gold. It is not meant to just sit in wallets forever. It is a working resource, circulated through the network as the engine of decentralized computation. People don't hold ETH just for speculation. They hold it because they need it to interact with the ecosystem. A developer deploying a new dApp needs ETH. A gamer minting an item needs ETH. A trader swapping tokens needs ETH. Anyone doing anything on Ethereum, big or small, needs ETH. The more activity there is, the more ETH flows. At this point, the metaphor of oil becomes clearer. Oil has value because it powers machines. ETH has value because it powers digital economies. There's another piece to the puzzle, one that makes ETH even more interesting. When Ethereum processes transactions, part of the ETH used as gas is burned, meaning it is permanently removed from circulation. In the physical world, when oil is burned, it transforms into energy and disappears as exhaust. In Ethereum, when ETH is burned, it reduces the total supply over time. This mechanism means that heavy usage doesn't just consume ETH, it can also make ETH more scarce. Demand goes up the more the network is used, while supply decreases through combustion. This creates a self-balancing ecosystem where utility drives value. The burning mechanism was introduced to make ETH economically sound, helping it resist inflation and rewarding long-term holders while still being usable as fuel. It's like an oil well where each barrel burned slightly raises the value of the barrels that remain underground. But unlike real oil, Ethereum can be replenished through staking rewards, which maintain a sustainable cycle of issuance and consumption. ETH is fluid, dynamic, not static like Bitcoin's fixed supply. It breathes with the network. All of this forms the backbone of Ethereum's identity. It is not simply a blockchain, it is infrastructure. It is an economy, and ETH is the lifeblood that circulates through every vein, bringing energy where action is needed. Without ETH, the ecosystem collapses. With ETH, it thrives. As usage grows, when DeFi surges, when NFT demand explodes, when new applications attract millions of users, the need for ETH rises organically. Not because people want to store it like treasure, but because they must spend it. ETH's value is tied to activity. It reflects not only belief or speculation, but real digital consumption. Every transaction is a spark. Every smart contract is an engine turning. Every app is a machine humming with energy, and ETH is what keeps the lights on. So if Ethereum is a global computer, ETH is the fuel. But fuel alone doesn't explain everything. The real depth of the metaphor comes when we explore the broader economy built around it. Oil not only powers cars, it powers nations. It builds industries. It reshapes geopolitics. In a similar way, Ethereum is building something far larger than a network. It is shaping the digital future. To understand that future, we need to zoom out from the mechanics of how Ethereum works and look at why ETH, like oil, has become a fundamental resource for the emerging digital economy. Where is this new economy heading? Why are institutions and developers treating ETH as critical infrastructure? And how does this fuel narrative evolve when we step into the world of DeFi, NFTs, tokenization, and beyond? That's what awaits us next in Part 4, where the metaphor of oil meets real economic forces. Now that we've opened the hood of Ethereum and seen the engine running, we can finally return to the metaphor that has shaped how the world views it. People call Ethereum electronic oil, not as a poetic exaggeration, but because the comparison captures a fundamental truth. Ether is used, consumed, and required to make the entire system function. Just as oil powers industries, ETH powers decentralized applications. It is a resource of utility, not just a symbol of wealth. To appreciate this fully, imagine the early 20th century. Oil fields were discovered, and suddenly this thick black liquid turned into the heartbeat of modern civilization. Oil fueled cars, factories, power plants. It heated homes, propelled ships, mobilized armies. Whoever controlled oil controlled energy, influence, and future development. The world changed forever. Ethereum is not physical oil, but its influence in the digital domain is similar. It is the energy source for Web3. Without ETH, smart contracts would freeze. DeFi markets would stop trading. NFT marketplaces would go dark. Metaverse worlds would fall silent. The economy doesn't vanish, but it loses its power source. This is why the metaphor sticks. Bitcoin sits in vaults. Ethereum runs machines. And unlike gold, oil is not meant to be locked away. Oil must be spent to generate value. It must be burned to keep the world moving. In Ethereum, ETH functions the same way. Every transaction consumes gas. Every piece of executed code burns ether. This consumption is not a flaw. It is a design, a feature that gives ETH purpose. If Bitcoin is digital wealth, ETH is digital energy. Let's pause for a moment and visualize Ethereum as a massive interconnected city. There are marketplaces where people trade assets, banks operating without bankers, art galleries where ownership is verified by cryptography, gaming zones where players earn real value, and governance halls where communities vote on changes. Streets connect everything. Traffic flows constantly, and every vehicle traveling those roads burns a little fuel. ETH. No ETH means no traffic. No traffic means no economy. That's why institutions, developers, and investors don't simply buy ETH to hold, they acquire it to use. Startups building decentralized apps must hold ETH for deployment costs. Users interacting with DeFi protocols pay ETH every time they swap or lend. Creators mint NFTs using ETH. Even wallets and bridges rely on ETH liquidity to operate smoothly. It's not just a speculative asset, it's infrastructure capital. Now here's where the metaphor gets even more interesting. Unlike oil, digital fuel doesn't pollute, doesn't physically burn, and doesn't need drilling. But it does have something oil lacks, a burn mechanism that permanently removes supply. Every time the network processes a transaction, a portion of ETH is destroyed. This is like saying that every gallon of fuel burned slightly reduces the total amount of fuel available in the world. In economics, this effect introduces something powerful, scarcity, that increases with usage. The more people use the network, the more ETH is burned, and the scarcer ETH becomes over time. Utility driving scarcity is a rare combination. Oil becomes more valuable as it becomes harder to extract, but burning oil doesn't improve oil's long-term store of value proposition. It simply disappears. ETH, on the other hand, becomes more appealing as an asset when activity rises because the burn rate grows, tightening supply while demand remains steady or increases. It is as if every time you drive your car, all the remaining oil in the world becomes slightly more valuable. This dual nature, fuel and asset, is part of what makes Ethereum extraordinary. Yet there's another dimension we must acknowledge. Oil shaped the 20th century economy. Ethereum aims to shape the digital economy of the 21st. Oil-powered engines, but ETH powers agreements. Oil built cities, but ETH builds digital nations. Oil funded wars, but ETH funds innovation. The comparison is not perfect, but it is meaningful. Oil enabled physical progress. ETH enables computational progress. Think about what smart contracts have already built. Peer-to-peer trading without intermediaries. Loans executed without banks. Digital art with provable ownership. Gaming economies where items have real value. DAOs where people govern collectively. Stablecoins pegged to fiat currencies. Every single one requires ETH to function. And beyond these visible applications lies an even larger vision, a tokenized world, where real estate deeds live on-chain, where music royalties distribute automatically, where identity is self-sovereign, where global payments settle instantly. In such a future, ETH is not merely oil for DeFi or NFTs, it becomes oil for everything. Some skeptics argue that blockchain ecosystems will diversify and Ethereum might face competition. They aren't wrong. Other networks exist, some faster, some cheaper, some more specialized. But Ethereum still stands as the foundation, the first great programmable chain. It's where the liquidity is, where the developers build, where the culture lives. In the way oil markets once determined world power, Ethereum's ecosystem today influences Web3 direction and innovation. And like any energy resource, ETH's role grows with adoption. When markets heat up, usage surges, gas fees rise, and more ETH is burned. When the ecosystem expands with layer 2 chains, rollups, and scaling tech, the network can support even more activity, multiplying demand for ETH even further. The fuel system is built into Ethereum's core identity. So when someone calls Ethereum electronic oil, they are not describing hype, they are describing function. Oil powers engines, EH powers computation, oil fuels machines, ETH fuels contracts. Oil gave rise to industrial society, ETH fuels the digital one. With this understanding, our journey naturally leads to a larger question. What does an economy built on electronic oil look like? How does this reshape finance, ownership, production, and creativity? And where does Ethereum go from here? In the next section, we explore how ETH moves beyond technology into markets, business models, and the global digital economy. How this invisible fuel is already changing industries, and how much further the transformation might go. As Ethereum matured and builders began experimenting with its programmable capabilities, something remarkable happened. People stopped seeing ETH merely as a coin to trade and started seeing it as the underlying resource of a new economy. It was as if oil wells had been discovered beneath the surface of a digital world. Except this time, instead of fueling cars and factories, the fuel powered code, applications, and markets that operated without human intermediaries. This shift didn't happen overnight. It began quietly, with developers writing smart contracts that seemed experimental at first. Simple token launches, early games, basic decentralized applications. But like sparks in dry grass, these efforts grew, spread, connected, and eventually ignited movements larger than anyone predicted. The first explosion was DeFi, decentralized finance. Traditionally, finance is built on layers of trust. Banks, custodians, brokers, clearinghouses. Each takes time, fees, and control. Ethereum asked a daring question. What if code could replace the entire stack? What if people could lend, borrow, swap, and earn interest purely through smart contracts? Suddenly, markets came alive. People exchanged assets without exchanges, lent money without banks, earned yields without permission, and every transaction, every swap, loan, liquidation consumed ETH as gas. DeFi became Ethereum's industrial revolution. The fuel was Ether. The machines were smart contracts. The product was trustless finance. Not long after, a second wave crashed into the world, NFTs. At first, many dismissed them as digital pictures, but beneath the surface, something deeper was forming, a new concept of ownership. For the first time in internet history, digital items could be uniquely owned, traded, and verified without a central server. Art, music, game assets, membership tokens, collectibles, all became liquid markets. NFTs turned creativity into an economy. Artists earned royalties coded into contracts. Gamers traded items with real monetary value. Brands, musicians, and communities built new identity systems. And again, every minting, listing, transfer, and sale required ETH. The fuel of imagination was Ether. Then came DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, groups functioning like corporations without CEOs, capital raised without investors in suits, governance executed by voting contracts rather than boardrooms. Communities pooled funds to buy assets, invest in startups, even attempt to purchase the US Constitution. It was chaotic, strange, beautiful, and each DAO treasury, each vote, each proposal powered by ETH. By this point, Ethereum was no longer just a network. It was a self-running digital economy, one that did not sleep, did not shut down, did not ask for permission. Applications operated globally. Users interacted instantly. Capital flowed without friction. Every participant was simultaneously a citizen, investor, and user. But Web3 didn't stop there. New ideas emerged rapidly. Payment rails without banks, identity systems without big tech, supply chains with provable authenticity, tokenization of real-world assets, gaming worlds with full player ownership. Even governments began studying blockchain for land registries and public infrastructure. Corporations invested in Ethereum development. Universities taught smart contract programming. The movement was no longer niche, it was infrastructure level. Think again of the oil metaphor. Oil shaped the global power structure. Wars were fought over it. Economies built around it. Transportation networks designed to consume it. Energy was leverage, and oil was the lifeblood of industry. In our era, the battlefields are digital. Data is land. Computation is industry. And ETH is energy. Instead of factories, we have decentralized applications. Instead of shipping routes, we have blockchain networks. Instead of oil rigs, we have validator nodes. When people stake ETH to secure the network, they become digital oil producers, validating transactions, earning rewards, keeping Ethereum alive. Staking is not mining machines burning electricity anymore. It's capital securing consensus, a financial engine instead of a physical one. And now, with Ethereum scaling through rollups and layer 2 networks, the economy is expanding like cities built outward from a thriving capital. L2 chains process transactions faster and cheaper, yet still settle and pay fees to Ethereum mainnet. They are like highways extending from the central city, and ETH remains the fuel flowing through every lane. If the future becomes multi-chain, multi-layer, Ethereum still sits as the settlement layer, just as oil remained essential even when renewables arrived. Alternatives may arise, but infrastructure momentum is hard to replace. Liquidity, developers, communities, standards all orbit around Ethereum. In many ways, ETH is becoming something oil never was. Programmable energy, global, permissionless, and borderless. Oil powers machines of the physical world. Ether powers machines of logic, incentive, ownership, and trust. Look ahead, and the possibilities stretch beyond finance and art. Imagine a house deed tokenized as an NFT, transferred instantly with ETH. A car that rents itself when unused, payments handled via smart contract. Bills paid automatically by wallets with recurring contract logic. AI models owning themselves, funded through DAOs, generating revenue. Entire businesses structured as on-chain economies. If these visions sound far-fetched, so once did online banking, ride-sharing apps, or digital currencies themselves. The pattern of innovation always moves from impossible to inevitable. Ethereum sits at the center of this progression, and ETH fuels every step. As we move toward the final chapter, the question is no longer why ETH is called electronic oil. We understand that now. Instead, we ask something more personal, more philosophical. What does this mean for us? Not just as investors or users, but as people witnessing the birth of a new economic paradigm. And that reflection leads us into part 6, where we step away from mechanics and metaphors and speak from the heart. Now that we've walked through Ethereum's origins, its core mechanics, its use cases, and even the storms it has weathered along the way, I'd like this final part to step away from charts, white papers, forks, and gas metrics. Instead, I want to talk about how Ethereum feels. Because beyond its architecture and upgrades, there's an emotional layer, the kind you only sense at midnight, staring at the glow of your monitor, watching blocks finalize one after another like heartbeats of a digital organism. And in moments like that, I ask myself, why does the world call Ethereum electronic oil? To me, the term isn't just a metaphor for powering decentralized applications. It is a symbol of a shift in human thinking. When oil was first discovered, people didn't see it as treasure. It was thick, dark, messy. But once refined and burned for energy, it ignited the Industrial Revolution. Powered engines, planes, cities, wars, progress, it changed civilization forever. Ethereum feels like that kind of discovery. Instead of flowing beneath the earth, it flows through nodes and validators across the globe. Instead of fueling machines, it fuels ideas. Ethereum feels like a vast open universe where anyone, a developer, an artist, an investor, a curious student, can step in and whisper, "I have an idea. Can you run it for me?" And the network quietly responds, "Yes, just add gas." It isn't perfect. It has been slow, expensive, criticized, doubted. Gas fees have frustrated thousands. Debates like ETH can't scale, Bitcoin is the only real store of value, or will layer 2s replace the base chain echo endlessly. But maybe imperfection is what makes the metaphor stronger. Oil wasn't clean either. It polluted, sparked geopolitical tensions, reshaped borders. Yet it was foundational. Ethereum feels the same. Flawed, but fundamental. When I think about Ethereum, I don't see just an asset. I see a giant social experiment. A digital economy where trust is built into code. A system where millions of strangers collaborate without knowing one another's faces, and yet value flows like electricity. Every smart contract, every NFT minted, every stake, every transaction is like another drop of fuel fed into an engine that never sleeps. And perhaps the real beauty of electronic oil lies in its invitation to imagine. Oil powered factories and engines, but Ethereum powers creativity. It runs decentralized finance, digital identity, virtual worlds, art, governance. It is not merely oil for machines, it is oil for imagination. It gives energy to visions of a world where you own your data, your money, your work, not through centralized permission, but through math. Maybe decades from now, someone will look back and say, Ethereum was the spark, the first engine of digital value, the beginning of something much bigger. There may come faster chains, cheaper networks, newer technologies. Just like we found alternatives to oil, gas, nuclear, solar. Yet history never forgets the first ignition. Ethereum was the engine that roared to life and told the world, value can be decentralized. That, for me, is why Ethereum earns the name electronic oil. Not simply because it powers transactions, but because it energizes a movement. It keeps spinning the gears of innovation. It burns with the heat of millions of dreams. It is the fuel of a new era, one where trust is programmable, ownership is verifiable, and creativity runs on code. Ethereum may rise or fall, it may be celebrated or criticized, but it continues to burn, powering thousands of ideas each day like oil in a global digital engine. And somewhere between the blocks, the debate, the volatility, I see a technology worthy of its name: electronic, oil, not just a term, a vision of the future.